Hello and welcome back to Neuro Chatting, the podcast series that talks about all things neuro and everything else. So we've called this Let's Not Talk About the Weather because it relates to an incident that happened at the centre a few weeks ago when I'd heard on the radio that I think it was roughly around about 63% of the time that we take when we're chit-chatting with people is about the weather. So the suggestion was that you should try and introduce something new into the conversation. So I went into the centre. The weather was particularly vile that day, just for a change in Lancaster. It was raining, and what is it ever doing anything else? And then I went to the table, and everyone was talking about the weather. So I said, "What's your favourite song?" And people were kind of like, what, and then we got a conversation going about the weather.
About the weather or about...
No, about not the weather, about why I was saying, let's not talk about the weather. So that's kind of become a bit of a catchphrase now. So when people are leaving, say, all right, have a nice evening, let's not talk about the weather.
Hashtag, let's not talk about
the weather. Yeah. Let's not talk about the weather. So yeah, because it's kind of like a bit of I didn't intend this at all. I didn't even think about this, but it's kind of a bit of a metaphor as well for how people might be feeling, because our weather, the weather can be changeable, as can conditions like neurological conditions particularly can be really changeable. And we could start applying some of the funny shipping forecast sayings to how we're feeling.
Yeah.
Mild, reaching cyclonic.
No, I love that. I think we should just actually mention the fact that before recording this, we've just finished a spot of lunch together where we saw the most beautiful rainbow, which was lovely. So I know that's talking about the weather, but I think this idea that we do spend a lot of time talking about the weather and how it does become sort of all-encompassing. So recently I was getting married, and the build-up to it, the amount of people that were just saying, I hope it's a nice day, I hope it's a nice day. And I was thinking, well, it'll be a nice day regardless, because it's about, it's so much more than the weather. Yeah. And it was a beautiful day. We were very blessed. It should have been blowing a gale, and we got a gorgeous day. But it's just this way that we intrinsically seem to talk about the weather as, I suppose it's a go-to safety topic, that there's probably nothing really innocuous in the weather, but it is a bit of a metaphor sometimes in terms of how we probably feel, like you say, whether it's you're feeling happy, whether you're feeling sad, or what it might be. How is it in Pakistan? Do you talk about the weather there, or is it another sort of go-to conversation that everybody talks about?
Well, we do talk about the weather. It's usually around how hot it is or how humid it is. The temperatures in Pakistan go up to 50, 52 degrees from at where I live, and it's really hot. So the conversation is usually around how hot it is or how humid it is, and how it's impacting everyone's hair day.
Frizzy hair. Yeah. I've got a friend with frizzy hair.
Yeah, as you can tell, it rained today, and you can probably tell from my hair. My hair hates moisture. So yeah, we do have conversations around weather, and I believe it's a neutral icebreaker when you meet someone.
Yeah. So it's fairly safe, isn't it? Because most people experience the weather.
Yeah.
And so I think that day, though, obviously I had to give an explanation as to why they were talking about the weather, and I just suddenly say, "What's your favourite song?"
Yeah.
And that kind of veered people off a little bit from the weather. But the conversation that we had after that was really quite interesting, because people then started talking quite in depth about their favourite songs, which was great. Why is it your favourite song? Yeah. What is it about that song that you remember, that you that you like, or and I think it was just nice, and it led to other things. I think you mentioned earlier, Leanne, about books.
Yeah, I love books. I'm a bibliophile. I can't walk past a bookstore without going in. I can't walk out past a bookshop without buying something. And I always have a book. We were going away for a weekend overnight at the weekend there, and we got on the train, and I pulled my book out, and my partner was like, You brought a book, and I was like, you're surprised at that? I just always have a little book
all weekend.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I'm not going to talk to you all weekend. I'm going to have my book. So yeah, I love reading. And I find excuses to talk to people about books in any way. So I'm loving the fact that you've somehow segued it into the podcast. Like, yes.
Well, I think it's really cool because I think that books can be such a conversation starter as well. And I think sometimes they can lead you to other conversations about other things, you know, that, if you've read something in a book that might be relevant or, you know, to what you want to discuss. I mean, I think that the weather, we're going back to the weather now, or even like when you read a book, it's got a start and a middle and an end, and there'll be ebbs and flows and peaks and troughs, and that's exactly what it's like living with a neurological condition. And the weathers can reflect our bodily feelings as well, can't it? You know, you could have a day where you feel particularly low, and then another day you might be, I'm quite bright today. And it kind of leads me to a weather metaphor, really, because the same day I told this table about why I was asking about what their favourite song was, and a bit later on another of our friends came in, one of our members, and she said, "Oh, what are you talking about?" I said, "Well, we've been talking about songs and all sorts of things." She said, "Oh, that's interesting." And I told her about the weather thing, and she said, "Yeah, that's really interesting," because she said, "Whenever I've been here and I go home, my daughter always says to me, 'You've been at the Neuro, Mum, haven't you? Because you're bright.
Ah,
You're much brighter when you've been there.' She said, so I guess that's a bit like the weather, isn't it?" And I'm thinking, yeah, it is kind of, yeah. And it's nice. It was nice for her to say that, but yeah, it's kind of, it's there, isn't it, all the time, you know, the weather, but we don't actually think of ways that it might be relevant in...
Yeah, and how we feel, because it does, like when you've got a bright summer's day, everybody's happier. And when it's a bit colder and blistier, everyone's a wee bit like, you know. And I think it is. Weather's a great metaphor for how you can feel in your everyday life, and how it can be, like you said, a metaphor for your diagnosis and for your conditions, like how you maybe move through the storm of the diagnosis through to the sunshine of finding places like Neuro or support groups where you can actually, you know, just feel a bit brighter about yourself and about what you're going through and stuff.
It's really important to have that, have an outlet, isn't it? I mean, I think that's one of the key, you know, I mentioned in a I think previous podcast that when I was first diagnosed, there was that thing about the dollhouse furniture, and you said, Leanne, well, that, you know, that is a way for them to kind of think they will be uplifting someone, and I can see that, and I think that we do lots of different things that you wouldn't think people would want to do, but they do, and get quite antsy about it if we say we're not doing it. So, like the music quiz and things like that. The music quiz is great because we can say sometimes our members will choose the tracks for that week, and that's always interesting, especially if it's. I'm going to mention him by name, Jags. If he chooses it, it's heavy rock all the way, heavy metal. And we all know it's him that's chosen it. And that's really good. And you know, one of the other things is we've just done, leading on from that, let's not talk about the weather, that same day, one of our members, Craig, he said about the wildlife photography. And so we set it up on our big screen and gave this film of all his photographs that he's done. And no one was talking about the weather. Everyone was talking about how amazing is that, and how long did you have to wait to get that shot, and tell us how you did it. And it was fascinating.
What's interesting about that though is it was wildlife shots, so you imagine the weather was actually quite a central part of what the photo would be, whether it was taken when it was sunny or when it was rainy, and because that can obviously make or break a photo in lots of
but we didn't mention the weather at all.
Yeah, exactly. But that comes back to the story you were telling us earlier whilst we were having lunch, Sharon, about the idea of the woman who lost her sandals.
I heard this story. It was on Radio 4. I don't think I'm breaking any rules by mentioning that. But and she remembers losing her sandals when she was a child, and she left them on a rock. And when she came back, the tide had come in, and these sandals had gone, and she thought she'd lost them to the sea, and then noticed a woman further down the beach with the sandals, and she'd rescued them. And it turned out that this girl, this woman now, but when she remembers that incident clearly, because she then discovered that the lady who'd rescued her sandals had written the Womble's books, and so she called her Mrs. Womble. And she was being interviewed, and this interviewer said, "What was the weather doing that day?" And she said, "Oh, I've no idea." She said, "I'd like to think it might have been sunny, but it was probably raining, but I don't know." And that's the thing. It's the weather happens whether we're engaged with it or not. But yeah, it takes up apparently 63% of conversation. It's quite.
Yeah. And when you flip that then onto sort of like diagnosis and neurological conditions, I think the expectation is that 63% of your time, or all your time, going back to what we were talking about in the previous podcast about that idea of disability is all encompassing, and once you've got that label of a condition or a disability, then that's all you are. But actually, in fact, as we know, that's a tiny proportion of who you are as an individual. And so actually, that's what I suppose we're hoping to just do today as well, is just chat a little bit about the things that make you who you are, what the books are that you like to read, what the songs are that you like to listen to, or the music that you like to listen to, and talk about who we are as people rather than the condition, and always focusing on the condition, which takes
absolutely, because that's really key, isn't it? And I think at the weather, that idea of weather represents that perfectly, because it would just some things just strike you, don't they? Sometimes it's
lightning strikes.
Yeah. Oh, here we go now. We'll be finding all sorts of ways to mention the weather now. We're not mentioning the weather. Yeah. Don't talk about the weather.
So I suppose, what's your favourite song, Aisha?
That's a tough one. I have lots of favourite songs. Depends on what my mood is or what my frame of mind is. But I like listening to Pakistani music, I like listening to Indian music, I like listening to English music. So which particular genre would you like to know about?
Whichever you wish to tell us about. I suppose, what's your go-to music when you feel like life's getting you down a little bit?
It's usually sad songs, inspirational songs, songs that my dad used to listen to, songs related to spiritualism and religion, and just life lessons. I think I find comfort in listening to songs my dad used to listen to. It gives me a lot of comfort. And now that I'm older, I can figure out what he might be feeling when he used to listen to those songs. So he was really fond of music, and I just listened to those playlists on repeat.
Oh, that's kind of lovely. You've got his playlists that he listened to.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. It's almost like an imprint of... I always remember reading that when Heath Ledger passed away, the actor, he had an iPod that had... Apparently his iPod was like really bizarre music and playlists on it. And whatever movie he'd been working on at the time, all the different cast had sort of moved it around. And then they made sure, like, they packaged it up and gave it for his daughter. And I remember thinking, that's really beautiful, actually, because she would have been really young probably when he passed away, and actually for her to grow up and maybe get a little semblance of insight into her dad and what he liked to listen to, especially because when you label your playlists different, like, I have one that says jazzy numbers when I'm feeling a bit like I want something upbeat, and then I've got one that's more like relaxed tunage, I call it, and that's for when I'm wanting to and I think actually that can tell a lot about someone from their playlist in terms of what what they're feeling, or what songs help them maybe decompress or lift their spirits up. And so that's really lovely. I love the fact that it's like it's almost your way of reconnecting with your dad.
Yeah, there's this one particular song by Rahat Fateh Ali Khan. He's very popular. He has concerts in the UK as well. And I remember in his last month, he told me to put this video on YouTube, and he didn't know how to put on videos on YouTube. So every single day in that last month, I'd say about 5 times a week, there was this particular song he requested. And I also have a video of one of those days with my bird and my dad looking at the telly and listening to that song. And when I think of it now, I think maybe that was his way of telling us, because the song is about grief, and it's about hopelessness, and it's about you're ready to admit that there's no hope left in life now. And it's a sad song. It's an eye-opener, and now when I listen to it, I get very emotional every time I listen to it. But I think that was his way of telling us that it's time to go. Yeah.
That he was ready to let go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so surprising that above 3 to 5 times in that last month, per week in that last month, I played that video on YouTube for him. And I used to laugh at him. I said, please listen to something else. Let's look up some other songs that you like. And he used to always come back to that one, that I need to listen to that ghazal. And it's sad.
Yeah, it's sad, but it's actually quite beautiful as well, because it was something that was familiar to him and that meant a lot to him, and something that even in the depths of his illness, which was clearly chronic and going to lead to a death, he still hung on to that. And that's about him as a person, isn't it? It's about what was important to him, and I think that's where...
And it might not have been sad to him.
No.
Maybe to you it might feel like hopelessness, but maybe to him it felt like acceptance, or...
Probably.
Yeah, it might not have, we're assuming it's sad, and we interpret music in that way. So I'll hear people listening to something and think, God, that's dead depressing. But then to that person, it might not be depressing in the slightest. It might be really uplifting, or there could be a particular lyric or a particular moment that they remember. So for your dad, it might not have had anything to do with the lyrics. It could be the tune, it could have been the melody. Yeah. It could have been that he remembered those times with you and the bird, and it remained. So we never know. That's what's kind of lovely about it.
You that moment back again, time and time again. You'll always have that moment with your dad, with the bird and your dad.
Music's got a great way of doing that. It can just transport you. I love the recent sort of John Lewis advert for Christmas this year, where that's about the son giving the dad an LP, and the LP is a song that has obviously been important to them all the way through, and they just give each other this big hug. And to others people, it would just be like, okay, whatever. But the thought that song can just unite people in such beautiful ways, it's lovely.
I think it is. What's your favourite song?
My favourite song is... I've got lots of favourite songs, but my ultimate favourite song is In the Mood by Glenn Miller. It's a really sort of... Yeah, it's probably it's an old song, really, but it's quite similar to yourself, Aisha, in that it was... My granddad loved Glenn Miller, and my granddad used to listen to big band and jazz music, and he inspired within me a love for jazz. And I just... I've loved that song since I was tiny, and it just always reminded me of my granddad and just feeling really safe in his arms. And and I just love that song, and I love how it goes really, really quiet and it goes dead loud, and I just love the way it plays with tone and stuff that way. And I remember one of my fondest memories, it was my granddad's birthday. It was his 75th, and we had like a party thing for him, and I remember dancing with him. I had my heels on and I was dancing away, and I just always remember dancing at the end of it. He was like, you're going to kill me here, girl. And because he was at a pub, but I remember us dancing to In the Mood, and I'm doing his little shaky shimmy dancing, and that's what I love. And it's just one of those songs that just when I listen to it, I just get the biggest smile, and it just makes me feel safe and happy, and it's just lovely.
I think that's really nice, because I think it kind of as well demonstrates how important music and song is to people with memory loss, for example. And you know, most of us with a neurological condition go through periods where our memory's not that good. And but usually music will unite people and make them feel, you know, my mum was diagnosed with dementia, and when, you know, she had to go into care, which was very sad, but she had complex health conditions and we just couldn't manage when she wasn't being looked after properly. And I wrote, they must have been so annoyed with me at the care home, 6 pages about her, because I wanted them to know who she was. And I said, you know, if she gets tearful or upset, all you need to do is put The Sound of Music on and make her a cup of tea in a proper cup, and she will be calm. She loved the sound of music, absolutely loved it.
Well, like the titular sound of music, like The Hills Are Alive, or was it like Edelweiss, or was it?
It was. I think her favourite one was The Hills Are Alive, but she liked the one, How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria? She loved that one too. And, you know, she would have, that was it. She would, you know, be calm to that. That would make her feel happy. And I was quite, you know, it seemed a simple thing to me, but then if they didn't know that, they couldn't give her it. That's what she wanted. So
I think that is important, actually. Like those. So whenever we go on like jumbulance trips and I'm a carer, it's really handy actually when someone gives you like a care plan or just a background information about the person, and you kind of know like this is what they like, this is what they don't. Simple things, you know, like when you're suddenly, you don't know someone and you realise that, okay, I'm trying to force feed you banana and they don't like banana.
Absolutely.
So those that little bit of, and just this is the music that they like, and you think, well, actually I've got my iTunes there, I've got my Spotify there, and I can pop that music on, and that make them just feel a little bit more comfortable. And so I think that information, I know you think that would have been annoying, but surely that must have been quite handy for them to know that all they needed to make your mum happy was a cup of tea
in a proper cup
and the sound of music. That's quite low maintenance.
It is. I mean, she used to, you know, when she first went into a care home, they gave her mug. I gave her a tea in a plastic mug, and I said no, she can have a proper pot, you know. No, don't give her plastic, but they can get dangerous. I said, she's not going to throw it at you or anything like that. That will make her feel, and she'll love it. That's what she wants. She just
makes
wants
her feel like herself.
Yeah. I mean, what would have finished off the trio of what would have made her feel better wonderfully would have been a cigarette, but she wasn't getting one of them. Although
you drew the line
there. You know, well, they wouldn't allow it inside the care home. But I've got a song which I call my favourite song, and if it comes on the radio, I love to hear it. And it's Matt Monro, On Days Like These. I absolutely love that song. It's got nothing to do with that mad film with Michael Caine in it, which is a brilliant film, but it's just his voice. It's just so wonderful, and he sings that song. And I get a lot of my music passion came from my gran, because I used to help her in the kitchen, and we used to listen to, I'm old enough to know about Family Favourites, which was a radio show that used to be on back in the late 60s and into the early 70s, I think. And I can still remember them now, what they used to say, you know. It was like, welcome to Family Favourites, so a bit like podcasting. But and it was for BFPO overseas, so it was for British forces posted overseas, so they used to play songs, and my gran listened to it religiously because my auntie and her 2 children lived in Australia, and she hoped, I think, that one day there might be something on the radio from them, message to her or the other way. I don't recall there ever being. And all they had back then, they didn't telephone each other. I mean, that was just way too expensive. But maybe every year a tape recording would arrive, and it would just be recorded over the year. So it was not really consistent, but I think she used to get more upset listening to it than, because she couldn't answer them. She could listen but not answer. And so a lot of the songs I remember that can make me feel really emotional are listening to Jim Reeves. My gran loved him. I mean, you know, she did. And if I, you know, Welcome to My World was her favourite. I can see her now in her kitchen, you know, beavering away, making her pastry and singing Welcome to My World out of tune with Jim Reeves.
So that's lovely.
But it's important, isn't it? And it's really, really important, I think, for it's about individuality, but it's also about community, because it brings people together as well. And when we do music sessions at the centre, you know, we sometimes work closely with a college for children with special needs, and they come along to singing sessions and they just love it. They get so into it, and they'll sing along to Cilla Black and also, and I just think it's really important. And it's I'm going to go back from singing to what you mentioned about books before, because that you might have some ideas, because one of the things we find difficult is we've never been able to properly get a book club off the ground. Now, and I think the problem lies with how long sometimes it can take people to read a book.
Read a book, yeah.
And they forget what they've read.
Yeah.
And we did try something actually one time where I found someone who agreed to record a short story.
Yeah.
So I have a French, lovely speaking voice, and I thought if she records a short story, we could listen to that on headsets and see what people thought about that. And we've just got an idea for a synopsis club. We're not going to call it that. We'll think of something a bit snazzier. But instead of reading the whole book, we thought we might read the bit on the back that tells you about the book, and then talk about what we've read and what we think might happen. And do you think it's a sort of, you know...
I love that. Sort of like, this is what I want to happen in this book. And if the author hasn't done that, I'm going to be a little bit disappointed.
Exactly. And I think it was just that thing of talking about it, really. And then...
Another thing that's really interesting is I had a conversation about this with my partner about this time last year, where I was talking about how my friend... had listened to a good book. So I said, she read a good book on Audible. And my partner said, well, that's not reading. And I said, well, it is, because she's got dyslexia and she struggles to read like with a book. So she listens to the book because it makes more sense to her. And just what we're talking there about sound and how important sound is and how that can bring it to life. And we had this really fascinating back and forth, and then eventually he came round and said, well, actually, yeah, there's more than one way of reading, and he hadn't thought about it in that way. But that's the other way that you're talking about. Like, I think that's the thing. There's so many Audible came out from audio books that were initially for visually impaired people, and then it realised actually lots of people like to listen to this, and there's more than one way to read a book and to engage with a book. So, but also I love the idea of the synopsis. I love the idea that you could write a better book than the author's written.
we just, I think it's kind of sometimes, you know, we just discovered two of our members who actually can't read.
Oh.
And that was by complete chance, because I bring this magazine. I get a magazine which I started subscribing to during lockdown, and which I still get. And I won't mention it because obviously it's advertising and we don't get paid by these people. So we better not start advertising their stuff. But it's a lovely magazine, and it's all about just having simplicity in your life, really, and just looking at nature, and there's a short story in it and a little bit of cooking, and it's just a languid move through the month, basically, in a book.
Oh, that sounds nice.
It's very nice. And one of our members, I believed, was reading it. I kept seeing this person with this and reading, turning the pages and, you know. So I said, oh, what are you reading in there? And there was no answer. And then just looking at the pictures. I said, okay, great. Which ones are you looking at? You know, what's interesting? And then someone else joined in and said, I can't read either. And so I said, well, if you want me to read anything for you, I'm more than happy to read it. And then that led us on to something else, and then a lovely compliment, which we don't need to talk about that. But the thing is, they said to me, you see, you care about us because you want to know what we can and can't do, and then if we can't do it, you'll help us to do it. And I thought, that's all we ever want in life, isn't it? Just somebody who can be a bit supportive.
But I think those little conversations sometimes as well, that simplicity of asking someone, what are you reading, can mean a lot. I remember before I moved to Lancaster, I was in Glasgow studying my PhD, and there was a homeless guy, he probably still is, in Buchanan Street in Glasgow, just outside the Greggs, and he always had a different book. And I used to see him because it was close to the train station. And I just remember this day, I was always, because I'm just so, A, a bibliophile, and B, incredibly nosy. I just wanted to know what this guy was reading, because he always had a different book and it always looked really interesting. And so this day I plucked up the courage and I just said to him, what are you reading? And I ended up having this lovely 10-minute conversation with this lovely man whose name was Jim, and learning that he has always been an avid reader, was in the army, came back after he'd been in Iraq and couldn't cope anymore. And so he feels most comfortable in the streets. And so that's why it is. And so he goes to the local library, he gets all the books that he can get, and he says, and people are generous, so he can always get some food, and he finds some place to bunker down at night. And it completely robbed me of all my, I suppose, my preconceptions of when you see someone who's on the streets and what you assume. And so it was a real life lesson for me that way. But I was really struck by what he said to me as I was like, oh, I better run because I was late for my lecture by this point. And he said to me, thank you for asking me what I was reading. And it just, those simple words really got me thinking about the fact that actually it was a really simple question, but I could tell that it made him feel like he was seen, and it can be a really nice way of just opening up a conversation where you learn something wonderful about people, or you learn about their lives and you learn about yourself through that. And it's a really simple thing, but books and music and hobbies can be a really good way of doing that.
This is it, isn't it? And this is what's important about, obviously, but you're doing your research at Neuro drop-in, and some of our members quite a lot of our members are participating in that, and they will be revealing things about themselves to you because you're asking questions, and that's what they want to do. And I think that, just like your chap on Jim, who's quite happily reading near the train station, ignored probably for the most part, but is a real person. And I think that can happen, and I'm not looking for the sympathy vote here, or anything like that, but I think that can happen to people who have not just neurological conditions. If you're defined by that first, it kind of closes the door for anything else. And I think it's really, really important to, to sort of like keep, as much as you can, keep the opportunity there for people to talk about what they like to do. And, a lot of the time, crafts, for example, are difficult because, it's a great thing to talk about what you do as a hobby, but it can be quite difficult. However, we've got some great examples of, one of our members, for example, who's likes photography, but has a terrible tremor and can't do it, and was actually helped to find a tripod that he could use. And the success of that just, he said, I feel brilliant because I can do it now. Yeah. And it's like, sometimes it's a way in to the solution, isn't it? To something. It's not going to change it forever, but it adds to it's a bit like letting space open up for Craig to do his film.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a way of reminding us that we're all human, essentially. And I think so often, like neurological conditions and disabilities, like I've said before, that becomes all encompassing. That's all you're ever seen for. And so one of the things that whenever I'm teaching my students about accessibility and about disability in the marketplace, one of the things I'm constantly saying to them is see the ability before the disability. Yeah. See the person. Don't just see the wheelchair or the aids or whatever it is, whether that's like a cane or a wheelchair or a walker. Don't see that. And also, obviously, there can be lots of invisible disabilities as well, but see the person. And I think that's what talking about books and music and places that people like to go to, not talking about the diagnosis or the weather as we're using as a metaphor, but actually talking about life and what people like to do can be a really nice way of,
I think that's perfect.
Get to the crux of that.
It's really important because all too often you can just be not ignored but almost set aside for later. Whereas what you want to do is for now, and it can be challenging. It can be challenging sometimes, especially if people have difficulty with speech or communication, but you can find a way in. Yeah. And that's always a big reward for me, I think, finding that way in and thinking, we're in there now and we know something to say to that person. And, you know, even if it's just you found out the name of the cat or, you know, whatever it is, it's a nice thing.
So way to relate.
Absolutely, and it's huge and it's bigger than the weather.
Yeah, exactly. It is bigger than the weather. I was just thinking about you, Aisha. Did you say your mum's quite an avid reader?
She used to be an avid reader, but after her diagnosis, she just couldn't carry on with her hobby of reading. She can recall that when she was in school and she was at boarding school, she says, I always used to request to work in the library because I could just finish polishing the wooden floor and then I could get back to my reading. Yes. So I've always seen her with her books, but now it's sad to see her go over and over the same books again and again because she forgets and can't remember. But yes, she's always been fond of reading and writing.
Yeah, she writes. She's an avid writer, doesn't she?
Yeah. But if she forgets, when she reads it for the next time, that pleasure is brand new.
I was just thinking that there. I just finished
over again.
Yeah.
What a joy is that?
I just finished a book at the weekend that was just phenomenal. It was called Northwoods and it was about a set of woods in America and it was set over 400 years and the different inhabitants within these woods and then how it all came together. And it was phenomenal. And I got to the end of it and felt quite sad that I would never, like I'll reread it again at some point in the future, but I'll know what happens at the end and how it all comes together. And I'll never be able to reread it afresh. And I suppose in some ways that it's not nice in the way that how that is happening for your mum, but she probably does get pleasure from rereading these books, even if she has forgotten them or maybe doesn't remember them as much as she did, but she will have that pleasure of re-experiencing them in a new way. And there's something kind of nice about that, and maybe it's another way of thinking about it in that way.
Yeah, I guess she gets tired, she gets bored, and she puts the book down, and the following day she'll just start over.
But you know, it is to us it seems sad, and it seems as if she's just repeating, but she is repeating that cycle, but it's brand new every time.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of, you know, it can go in the reverse. Can obviously the brand new every time, because if it's something sad someone has to learn every day, that's really awful. But if it's something positive and nice, then you know that's really lovely. And I think I'm a huge reader, and I can't imagine never being able to read. And I did have to stop reading books and listen to audio for a bit. One of the funny things is there's a biographical piece by Alan Cumming, the actor, and it's called Not My Father's Son. And I have actually got all the way through that book, but it took me nearly 2 years because his voice lulled me to sleep. It's so soothing. I was like, oh, you know, that's to sleep. But no, and I love that. You know, all these things. If going back to Neuro drop-in, if someone had contacted us and said, I'm looking for help and support, and we offered them the chance to come along to a music quiz, that would be wrong. But if that person comes along and has their chat and then gets introduced to other people and joins the music quiz, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's that kind of thing, isn't it? And it's that get past the mundane bit that you've got to deal with, the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And once you're past that, it's still there. If you want to talk about it, you make a special point of talking about it. You say, I need to ask you about this or that, and that happens. People say, can I ever talk to you about this? Can I tell you what's happened? Or, what do you think about this? And sometimes I know the answers. Sometimes I know where to signpost people to. Sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes the answer is from all the people around the table, which is great, because once you've built up a bit of a relationship with people, they share information, can tell each other, can't they? All the sort of things. So it's really quite amazing.
But it's movement towards that doesn't become 63% of what you talk about.
Exactly. And I don't think we could ever get anywhere near 63% because it just doesn't happen. I mean, it's kind of like, we don't talk about it that much. Yeah. It's an odd little thing. It'll be usually something that's happened. And it's amazing to me how something can happen and that person can feel, because I know it's happened to me. You'd be aware that I had an accident last year, which really gave me some problems, and it's not quite sorted yet, but it feels like it's been going on forever. But there's an end to it. And I've been miserable, I've moaned, and I've, complained about it, and it has prevented me from doing things, but I can see an end to it. When you get a diagnosis that's forever, there is no end, is there? So it's kind of really, it's difficult, but I think you do have to talk about some things, and that's good. It's healthy, because if you're bottling it all up, that's not good either.
No.
You've got to be able to talk about it. So as long as we keep away from the 63%, we're okay. Yeah. And we look for the rainbows. Oh, are we? Who's going to burst into song now? Start singing. Yeah. Oh, that was a really nice chat. So thank you for that.
Very lovely.
So you've been listening to Neuro Chatting, and we look forward to you joining us again. Bye-bye for now.